Well, I did some exhaustive research in outside Downs's one day, asking passers-by who Thomas was. Do you know, who was Thomas? Because I didn't know at the time, genuinely, right? I really thought it was St. Thomas, doubting Thomas. And nobody had any idea. So then I realized that when Henry II had landed in Passage East in 1171, right? He hadn't come necessarily to, start 800 years of, oppression in Ireland. He wasn't all that interested in coming and taking Ireland. He was really quite happy to leave it alone to the Irish, right? But the Normans, Strongbow, were taking it over, so he didn't want bothersome neighbours. So he had to come. But he also came as an alternative to being excommunicated by Pope Alexander III at the time for his part in the murder of Thomas à Becket at Canterbury. Now, what he had said within the hearing of his fairly stupid knights, 3 days before the murder happened, who will rid me of this troublesome priest? Because Becket had been his closest friend. And the king had always had problems with the church, interfering with things. So the brainwave was that if Becket became Archbishop of Canterbury, they'd have the whole thing sewn up. But Becket had become more part of the church than the church had ever been. So this row really happened over what we still call canon law. So that when priests or bishops or whatever had done terrible crimes, the king and the rest of his court wanted to punish the people, but the church at the time said, no, you can't interfere here. We will deal with that. And that infuriated Henry because he was king. He thought he could do what he liked. And he thought that when Becket became Archbishop of Canterbury, that would be softened. But Becket became more... I was reading a really fat history of Richard II, and I can't remember who wrote it. It isn't exciting. It's not a page turner. But he called Becket a theological dinosaur, which is a really good phrase, meaning Becket was more behind even the church at the time. And Alexander, the Pope, right, wanted Ireland and England, to become up to date. So he said to Becket, look, we won't excommunicate you. We won't make you go to the Holy Land, and free Jerusalem. Just go to Ireland, recover it for England, recover it for the church.
No, Henry, he said to Henry.
He said to Henry, yes.
This is after Thomas was killed.
This was before Thomas was killed.
Okay.
And but it was when Thomas was killed because Becket was infuriating Henry, right? Because he wouldn't play along. He wouldn't sort of hand over the bishops who had been murdering and doing all these terrible things. And so Becket then said drunkenly, who's going to get rid of this terrible priest for me? And the knights left his court. It's a really good film of this. Becket, it's called. Peter O'Toole plays Becket, and the Welsh actor, what's his name? The Welsh actor plays Richard Burton plays Becket, and it's historically very accurate. So the knights, they're in the court in France. They leave, they go over the channel, they stay for the night in Saltwood. They drink all night. They turn up the next day, absolutely plastered at Canterbury Cathedral, 31st of December, fierce cold evening. And they're so excited and crazy, that these skilled warriors make an awful mess of killing Becket. Instead of killing him, they butcher him. They take the top of his head and his brains go all over his altar, on the altar. So that caused a huge scandal. And the other reason that Henry II came over to England, just sort of 5 months after that, was because he needed to get out of the country because the people were going for his head. He was really at genuine risk of losing his crown.
Because Becket was so popular.
because Becket became instantly popular. I mean, Becket was canonized only 2 years after he was murdered,
Wow.
which was astonishing.
Are you saying that Henry didn't really want to murder, but he had said it?
He said it, he was drunk.
Okay.
And the Pope Alexander III believed him, do you know, and he said, yes, but of course, you know, you just said that because you were so exasperated with Becket. But then who wasn't? Do you know, Becket was deeply unpopular within the church, within the bishops and everybody, because he was so intransigent, do you know, because he was so sticking to, he thought that he should be Henry II's religious superior. Do you know, I'm God, I'm looking after you, I'm telling you what to do. And Henry was saying, you're not, I'm the king, right? Nobody tells me what to do or to think or anything. I'm telling you what to do. That's why I made you Archbishop of Canterbury. And and Becket just went further and further into this really stuck place. So it was his incredible obstinacy, you know, that caused it to happen. Now, when he was hacked down and his monks got him ready for burial, the astonishing thing they so-called found was that he was actually dressed in a hair shirt underneath all these posh clothes, and that this hair shirt was crawling with worms, right, crawling with vermin. So I'm not quite sure if that's true, you know, but that was the thing that turned everything. You know, when that got out, that the Archbishop of Canterbury had been wearing a rat, you know, an insect-infested hair shirt underneath all his clothes, he became an amazing attraction. And so the pilgrimage to Canterbury began almost immediately, and people were putting their hands into the blood, and they were being cured, you know, and blind people were putting it on their eyes and they were seeing. You don't have to believe any of this, and you know, personally I believe nothing of this, but it just grabbed the imagination. So for hundreds of years people were going to Canterbury and they were still able to buy little phials of blood. You know, they must have had extraordinary refrigerations at the time, you know, and they'd go home with these little ampules of blood from Canterbury. So Henry II, 1171, arrived in Passage in order to put Strongbow back in his box, in order to bring the Church of Ireland, all the bishops, into alignment with Canterbury. That's what his instruction was. But he also needed to make penance for what he had caused done to Becket. So he, for example, rather than go to the Holy Land, he gave the rights of the ferry from Passage East to Ballyhack to the Knights Templars. Right, provided he got half every fare, and provided pilgrims to Santiago were given free passage over. Do you know, because the other research I've been doing is that, do you know, there's a Church of St. James in Ballyhack, and you can find links to St. James all the way up to Dublin. So I think that was a pilgrim route for people. So if you think of Henry II landing in whatever, the pilgrimage to St. Thomas in Canterbury had just about started, you know, about 6 months earlier. But it wasn't really to burst into the huge thing it became. In fact, it knocked Santiago out of kilter. You know, the people were coming from all over Europe to Canterbury, and they stopped for a while going down to Spain. The other thing he did was, this is Henry II, he ordered the Church of Thomas, you know, St. Thomas, to be built on Thomas's Hill. There used to be a big hill there, and then the jail was behind it. And then if you look at the old maps, you'll see all these orchards, you know, which all the way go down to O'Connell Street now. So you go up Thomas Hill, turn around, and I have a photograph which I got, which shows the gatehouse, you know, the front door, as it were, still standing. And Mr. Lumley, do you know, famous Lumley name, wrote a very angry article about this back in the 70s, saying that the person had got planning permission, to develop the site, and the corporation had let him knock down the last bit. And this is a sort of, a Norman, and there's very little Norman stuff left in Waterford. So this was a beautiful Norman thing. And it was just knocked down, and Lumley really angrily states, and then the cleared site was left there for 10 years without anybody doing it. In other words, there was no hurry to knock this down. And now it's just a car park. So the only evidence you'll see up there at the moment is on the back. There's a back wall. As you go in the top gate, there's an old wall, and they reckon the archaeologists who looked at that recently, on behalf of the Waterford County Council, they said that that's all that's left of the boundary of that chain. So that's the only bit you can touch, and to say that was part of the church thingy. Church.
And when St. Thomas's Church was built,
yeah.
by Henry II?
Well, no, he ordered it built, but most people think that his idiot son John caused it to build when John came over. Henry wanted very little to do with Ireland, and he was busy. He was possibly one of the most efficient, and I suppose administratively really good kings there were. But he had these daft sons, Richard III, who just went off, to, not Richard III, Richard the Lionheart, who spent all his life and England's money, fighting crusades. And John, who was about 11 at the time when he sent him over to Waterford to become the boss of Ireland, and one of John's jobs that he had to do was to build this church. They built another one in Dublin. In fact, they built a whole abbey to do with St. Thomas a Becket in Dublin.
In Dublin?
Yes.
And does that still exist?
Nope. No, Henry VIII did for that.
Okay. And did those churches become important in Ireland at the time? I mean, I'm just thinking that if you say that Thomas Becket was so big in the UK, right? Did that manifest itself in Ireland? Did people go to these places as kind of a...
I don't think so. I mean, there's loads of evidence for pilgrimage in Ireland to Santiago, from about the 1100s, because they brought back, the shell. And when they were digging graves in Tuam and somewhere else, they found, skeletons with the shells. Now, people coming back from St. Thomas a Becket usually brought back a little thing of Thomas a Becket, but nobody. There's nothing like that being found. I'm not sure there was a huge appetite in Ireland to go on pilgrimage to Canterbury, because Catholics at the time, or people who believed in God at the time, would have seen Canterbury as interfering. I mean, there was a great program, I watched it the other day, about how it says how the Irish saved Scotland and England, and it's about the monks of Columbanus going over first to Iona, and then down into England. And England and Wales and Scotland were it was the Dark Ages, and had it not been for the Irish monks, we didn't have a Dark Ages because we never had a Roman invasion. So they didn't come over. So the lights didn't go out when they went because they were never on. But what we had was places like Clonmacnoise and Glendalough, and our own university cities as they were, full of science and everything. We took all that through the monks, through St. Columba, over to Scotland, down into England. And then a Pope sent over St. Augustine to take over Canterbury. And then when he started telling Dublin and Waterford and the rest of us, come along now, we're in your game, they said, hang on, if it hadn't been for us, you'd have nothing. So we've developed our own church, our own calendar in particular. Don't tell us when Easter is, or whenever. Don't tell us when Christmas Eve is Christmas Eve. We've been telling ye that, for hundreds of years, and now some sort of clever dick in Europe is telling ye, and now you're telling us. So we're not going. So I don't think there was a huge appetite from the Irish for pilgrimage to St. Thomas, but the appetite continued all the time to Santiago.
And would people in the UK, for example, have come over to Ireland as part of that kind of devotion to St. Thomas?
No.
Canterbury was always Canterbury.
Oh, it just became Canterbury. Do you know, 1170, do you know, 1170 was Christmas, you know, December the 31st was the time of the assassination of Thomas à Becket, his murder. And then, from then on, I mean, 2 years later, when he was canonized, you wouldn't be able to get to, you know, the roads were just choked.
Yeah. And obviously that was a big money spinner for Canterbury.
It was a money spinner for everybody on the way. Do you know, I mean, if you read Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, you know, which was written a couple of hundred years after that, he talks very cynically about the money being made out of this, and he was hoping that, you know, this better be true, the whole miracle thing. But whether it was or not, it made money. I mean, for example, there's no evidence at all that St. James is actually buried in Compostela, in Santiago. That's a complete legend. Do you know what I mean? St. James was one of the disciples, and he went off to bring Spain, you know, into the church, into Christianity. And he didn't get very far at all. So he came back to Rome with his tails between his legs. And there, sitting in Rome at the time, was King Herod, right? So he had James's head chopped off. And then his two disciples put James's body and his head in a stone boat, right? This is in the Mediterranean. And the stone boat sailed across the sea, went through the Straits of Gibraltar, right the way up the coast, and landed about 30 miles from Santiago, where it was found by a miracle. So it's amazing the people believe it. And
yeah, but wasn't it basically a way of Christianity mobilizing itself against the Moors?
Yes, it had two reasons. Yeah, one was the pilgrimages coming in from France made a sort of an opening on the top of Spain, and then they gradually pushed down and down and down. And the church was really all behind that because thousands of years before Santiago, right, Finisterre was the most important pagan route in the entire known land, right? In other words, people made pilgrimage, although they didn't call it at the time, you know, to Finisterre from Russia, from Norway, Sweden, Turkey, do you know, all the known places, all the routes go west to Finisterre. We have it in our own literature, High Brazil, the Isle of the Blessed. Do you know, that's in our folk memory. High Brazil, the Isle of the Blessed. And the myth was that if you went to Finisterre at a certain point as the sun was going down and it let this, you know, beam of sunbeam, if you walked across there, you got to Tirnanog. You got to Valhalla. You got to the land where you would never die. Now, nobody obviously ever did that. But when they sent young men to make this journey and they saw the sunset off Finisterre, when they came back, they brought back fertility, they brought back luck, they kept the gods away. So the communities all over Europe were sending young, healthy men and girls, presumably, to there, see the sun come back, and then we live forever. And there was apparently terrible sort of sacrificial rituals that went on particular rocks, you know, at Finisterre. And so the church were as keen, right, to religiousize this as St. Patrick was to change Croagh Patrick, because Croagh Patrick was our pagan ritual thing. You know, Croagh Patrick was full of sin, you know, according to the church. So Patrick couldn't wait to get up there and cleanse it of its filthy pagan rituals and all that. Oh, absolutely. But Finisterre was that. But the church didn't go all the way to Finisterre. They just said, no, we're going to stop at Santiago. And in fact, they made it a sin. Pilgrims going to Santiago were forbidden to go on the next 3 days to Finisterre. They were encouraged not to. They're only just now doing it. It's weird.
Finisterre was they call it the end of the world.
Yeah, Finisterre, the end of the world.
And it's very interesting. So that is a very old pagan site, Finisterre.
It is. Apparently, Finisterre in France is actually further out into the Atlantic, but they weren't able to work that out at the time. They didn't have maps.
Okay. Right. And so, so I mean, an awful lot. Obviously, in Ireland, an awful lot of Christian things came about through the kind of practice, whether it be different traditions, and that was how we say the new religious masters took over, adopt what was there.
Yeah, they kept what was good, what was useful,
like
what brought.
Yeah,
all those things were incorporated, into the religion, but all the pagan stuff had to go, obviously had to go. I mean, the other thing about pilgrimage in Waterford, I would imagine that most, Waterford people, when they think of medieval pilgrimage, would think of James Rice, the mayor of Waterford, who sailed 300 years after this, 300 years after Becket, 300 years after the church was built. He sailed to Coruña, 1473, from the quay, people say near where the clock tower is. There was a jetty on the one side over to the ferry bank, for the ferry, and then there was another jetty, and the ships sailed there. So if you go down to the clock tower, that's more or less where he sailed from. Now, he sailed again, 1483, 10 years later, he did another pilgrimage. And very few people did two pilgrimages. It was usually a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But he was a very wealthy merchant, and he had his own ships. And he could go any time he liked, but he had to get permission from the council, from Waterford Council, to go the second time. And he had to put his affairs in order. And one of the extraordinary things he did was to have this cadaverous tomb built in the cathedral before he went the second time. And this cadaverous tomb, and there's only one other in Ireland, and it's up in Dublin again, right? And the cadaverous tomb is, instead of him being represented like a knight or a well-off person on the top, he's represented, I think, astonishingly, it's an astonishing piece of art, as a rotting corpse, as a corpse in the very act of rotting, with frogs, living in his mouth, and worms coming out of his eyes, and his emaciated body with the bones sort of bursting out from the skin and everything. Now, he would have got that from Spain. That's a very Spanish thing.
But that's in Christ Church Cathedral.
Yes, that's in Christ Church Cathedral now.
But he would be in Catholic.
Yeah, but he had it originally put in a lady chapel in the old thingy, but as I've said before, one of the greatest acts of destruction was the destruction of the Catholic cathedral. Historians, Ryland says there was absolutely no need for that.
The Catholic cathedral was before.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Was in that same location.
Absolutely identical. In fact, when you go in on the right-hand side, go over to where the railings are, and you can look down into the crypt of the Catholic cathedral. Right? James Rice's tomb was outside, and when they rebuilt it and built the Protestant cathedral now, right, they had to bring his tomb in, and that's there now. But the Spanish influence, that what I used to notice, if I'd be walking in Spain on pilgrimage, and if you're going past a graveyard in the morning, in the dark, every graveyard has a big sign over it, right, in Spanish, obviously, right? And the sign says, we who are in here were once like you are now outside, but soon you too will be in here like we are. And they didn't add carpe diem, but I always thought, seize the day, when you read that. It's sort of chilling. And Rice wanted to remind people that this life just hurtles past, and this is what we're all going to look at. Now, he was a generous person. He left all his money. When he died, he was a rich man. But even as he was living, he was giving it away. I as a historical character, I like him.
And Rice, so what year was this?
1473, 1483. He died soon after the second pilgrimage.
Was he a mayor or what?
He was all that time, yes.
Okay. And what's his link then, or is there a link to the other race?
No, none. Absolutely none.
Okay.
None.
But it's not news remained though.
Yeah, but the other Rice was from Callan, he was a blow-in to Waterford from Callan.
He was also a merchant.
His father was a merchant, yes. Yeah, no, there's no connection. James Rice, the mayor, his parents were devoted to St. James. That's why they called him James.
Okay.
And he became devoted to St. James because of that. Whereas it's Edmund Rice, not James Rice.
But I believe that the Santiago Festival, whatever we call it, they start off with burning an effigy of a mosque.
That's new to me, Ollie.
They actually start the festival off by burning a cardboard replica of the mosque. It goes way back to their hatred of the Moors. So it's very graphic.
Really? I didn't know that. I've never been there for that.
No, I just saw a documentary.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to see.
Well, the Moors burnt down, I think, 3 versions of the cathedral in Santiago, so that's probably what they're...
Oh, I'm absolutely sure a lot of them, I mean, back and forth, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the old Islamic buildings now are converted into Christian.
They are, yes, yeah.
Depends who wins the battle. Okay, well that's interesting. And so that's documented that he went over twice.
Oh yes, absolutely, yes.
And would a lot of Catholic people have gone over at the time? Like rich people, and like as a kind of a little way people go to Mecca now for Islamic. Would it be seen to be one thing to do in their life to go to Santiago for an Irish Catholic rich person? Yeah,
no, in 1473, I don't know if I can remember this right now, this person at the time in Coruña, counted 70 ships, all in there, all pilgrim ships, 70, on the one day, and said that about half of them were Irish ships.
Wow.
So it was a sort of a rich man's thing, because you had to pay to get on the ship, and it would be about a week or something. But I mean, my argument about the Ballyhack route, right, is because not everybody would have had that money. So in my fertile imagination, I imagine sort of poorer pilgrims in Dublin, for example, wanting to go to Santiago. So rather than waiting, where the ships you sail from, where the old Ministry of Health used to be, on the quay there, I would have thought they'd have said, let's start walking. We'll walk down to Waterford and New Ross. Let's get going, because I mean, the more effort you put into the pilgrimage, the higher the reward was going to be when you got to heaven. And I'd imagine even some rich people who had the money to go by ship probably thought, let's walk it. Let's do what our European cousins are doing and walking it. They're walking from, all places, Rome or whatever, they're walking up to Santiago. We want to do that. Like people cycle the Blue Way. You could get the bus, but what's the point? So you may as well do it. So what I've been researching is, and I've I've cycled it twice now, from the Liffey to Ballyhack. And what you do is you really come down what is one of the 7 high roads in Ireland, which is I can't remember, the Schliekulen, right? The road to Wicklow, right? Schliekulen. And that starts at the Liffey, and it goes all the way down to Loughlin Bridge, and then it goes over. But people argued that if you kept walking down the Barrow, you would then come to St. Mullins, and there's a little church of St. Mullins in St. Mullins, a tiny little bed, dedicated to St. James, there, and the feast day, the pattern day in St. Mullins is the 25th of July, which is the feast day of St. James, which is when they burn the effigy, and in Ballyhack there used to be a big fair on the 25th of July as well. And there's a church of St. James there, and there's the bay, Arthur's Bay used to be called St. James's Bay. People tell me that, but they don't give me the proof for it, but I like to believe it. So I believe that from about the 1150s on, people walked from Waterford. People would walk from here down to Passage, go over on the ferry, thanks to Henry II, go over for nothing on the ferry, and then put up at Ballyhack Castle and then walk north to Dublin. Now, I haven't had that really confirmed as accurate, and I'm pushing for it, because if you were to go to Corunna, you have to walk 100 k's to get to Compostela. So they have various walks in Ireland that will, make up the thingy, but you have to have a stamp on them. So people are walking from, say, Lismore to Ardmore, or Ardmore to Cashel, or those things. So I'm arguing, well, why not have an actual path in Ireland that was actually walked by people going to St. James, going to Compostela. There it is. And walk, I think it's a fantastic walk from, say, Bagnallstown down to St. Mullins. Great walk. Yeah. Very safe as well.
But then you'd have to organise the boat to go from here down to St.
Well, I'm thinking of poor people without the money, that if they got to Waterford, right, or got to New Ross, and they would just stand there and say, "Where are you going, lads?" "Oh, we're going to Brest, or we're going to Cherbourg, or we're going," and they would hop over, right? Now, if they got the much shorter crossing over to France, or if they got over to England, there was a network of free accommodation all the way. Do you know, say if you got into Rosslare, not Rosslare, if you got into Fishguard, you could get free board and thingies from monasteries all the way down to Portsmouth, and then you get a sailing over to France, and then you're home and dry, because you're walking on pilgrim routes where there's monasteries all the way to Santiago and back, because you've got to go back again. So I imagine that loads of people did those short crossings, and the wealthy sailed from Dublin to Corunna and did a 3-way walk, and the wealthy sailed from Waterford to Corunna and did a 3-way walk. The real lads did the whole thing.
What do you call the 3-way walk? What's that?
Well, 3-day walk. Sorry, it's a 3-day walk. Corunna to Santiago, 3 days, easy. Three short days.
Okay.
Piece of cake.
That's interesting. And do you think it will take off?
I can't hear it from that noise or there at all.
Okay.
I don't
think they're doing it. Sorry, Damien, do you think it'll take off?
My walk? Well, I only want that part of it to take off, right? I only want the Bagnallstown, St. Mullins part of it to take down, because I've walked the rest of it, up to St. Mullins. It's incredibly dangerous. It's really dangerous. When you go over to Ballyhack, it's lovely. Then you find a green road. Then you go out on a small road, and then you're walking to New Ross. You take your life in your hands. I don't want to be encouraging people walking that. Most people don't know which side of the road to walk on. And I'd be walking along, and the Aegis over on the left-hand side, and I have this, well, I've been walking a long time, so I have this tradition of if there's a car coming towards me, I stop. I always stop and I walk off. So the person doesn't have to overtake me, because I don't want them overtaking me into a car coming up the other way. No, so I don't want, I step in, so I don't want bundles of people. And some of the routes, there's a fantastic path, well, it's on the road from Bagnallstown, and it goes up to Tullow. Now, if there's any road that's medieval, it's that one. Do you know, it goes, you'd imagine you're in Galicia. And it has this really old full feel in it. Now, I don't mind sort of experienced old farts like me walking that on their own, but I do not want it to become.
Yeah. It would have to be turned into like a greenway, isn't it? Yeah,
it would be, but we have a greenway as it is from Bagnallstown all the way down. That's the bit I'm pushing, to be an official pilgrim walk. And you could bring families. It's grass, so it's not very good for wheelchairs. And
this the Barrow walk?
The Barrow, yeah, and it's horrible for bikes. Horrible.
Which means horrible.
Well, I mean, it's dangerous. Like I cycled it twice, and when you come, say you're cycling along it, and then you have to go over the lock, over the bridge, and then you go down. You could easily skitter into it, because you're coming down on wet grass, and there's no. Do you know? I'd just like to ask Olivia O'Leary whether we could just put, 6 inches. I know, but it only needs to be the width of a tire. Like 4 inches. 4 inches of gravel.
Well, if you give you 4 inches, they'll take 4 meters.
No, I went to Olivia's meeting, and applauded and clapped and said, "Leave the Barrow alone." But I changed my mind when I cycled it.
So anyway, how did you become interested in all this? Just as a by the way.
Through default, really. I left. I suppose I was always interested in medieval history, because I was brought up in the main street in Featherton in County Tipperary, which is a medieval walled town. We had a medieval wall at the end of our garden. The place was covered with history. We weren't taught it, or nobody explained it to us or anything, but it got into me. Then I emigrated to England when I was 16, to London. Eventually was working with kids, eventually got into playing football really late, eventually became a very fast winger on the right-hand side, and then slowed down and lost my speed. And then I took up long-distance walking as the nearest way I could get that fix. I had this motor. I was useless at football, but I didn't get tired. At the end of the match, I used to hate the whistle going, because I wanted to keep going and going and going. And then we were on the North Downs Way long-distance footpath, was just down from us, between where we were and Folkestone Town. And myself and a couple of kids one summer walked that, to Farnham. And then the next summer, we walked the other end of it. And then I ran out of long-distance footpaths in England. Came back to Ireland in 1980, ran out of all the long-distance footpaths really quick, because there was only 3 of them, the Wicklow Way, the Kerry Way and the Dingle Way. There's more now, but they're not really joined up. I wish there was a path that goes all the way around the country. And then very hesitantly, I'd known about the Camino and the medieval paths, and I went over and I started at Le Puy, in the Auvergne in France, to walk to Santiago, but feeling very embarrassed because, I have no religious or at all, and I was embarrassed on this. But then I realized very few other people were pilgrims. Most people were walking it because as a long distance path. But to tell you the truth, Ollie, I was only on that, for about a week before it got to me.
You took the soup?
I think I did. In fact, I wear around my neck here, a medal, and one is a medal of St. James, right? And every time I'm on a plane, right, as we're taking off, I furtively, right, find this medal, right, and hold on to it like that until we're up, right? And then as we're level, I say, thank you. And I drop it back down again. And as we're landing, I'm searching for him again. Do you know? And that's a bizarre and irrational part of me. But it gets into you. I don't know how it doesn't get into people. You know, you're going to places, you're walking through villages, and you're looking for evidence. You know, where was he? Do you know, you're looking for evidence of St. James. Not, you know, St. James's churches and the things like that. And I think I've had really some terrible, you know, I walk alone, right? I shouldn't be, but I walk alone, and you cross mountains and you walk in the rain. And there've been 2 or 3 times at least where I thought I'd had it. Do you know, I thought I was going to die of hypothermia. Something turns up. Do you know, in France, a buckety little van turns up, and this farmer says, "Get in out of the rain, you idiot," you know, and takes me to a gîte where I get warm and dry and everything. And I attribute that to some sort of somebody looking after me, because otherwise I would have just gone. Crossing the Pyrenees the first time in fog and rain was another example of where I got really scared and really frightened. I'd emptied my rucksack of everything I had to wear because it was so cold. And I felt this hand on my shoulder. And I became incredibly warm and just continued to tear up the mountain. Do you know, I mean, I'm sure there's a psychological, psychosomatic explanation for all this. But I can't deny that happened to me. Do you know, I'm almost embarrassed saying that, but it is the truth. You know, it is part of my truth. And when you have those experiences, you begin to feel that you will always be safe, and that you're not really alone, and that there'll always be a bed at the end of the day, there'll always be food. Just stop worrying. And that's when you become a sort of a pilgrim, you know. And one of my heroes is John Bowlby, do you know, a great British, do you know, psychiatrist, child psychiatrist. And he didn't have any faith either, but he believed in pressing on, you know, against odds. And when he died, and he was buried in the Isle of Skye, do you know, on his tombstone, it just says, John Bowlby, 1880, whatever, to be a pilgrim. You know, so I'm going to borrow that one for my stone in Faith Lake Church.
To be a pilgrim.
Yeah, to be a pilgrim. Because it's not pilgrim in the religious sense. It's keep going. Do you know, the Spanish, the old Spanish greeting for pilgrims was ultrea. Ultrea. It means keep going. Don't stop. And you can just apply that to life. Do you know, don't let anybody put you off or put you down. You know, keep going.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
Have to remember all this. Okay, well, that's brilliant. And because I'm just conscious of time now, I'm expecting someone in 5 minutes or so. So, just about would you like to see something up on the site, or something to show that the site was up on Tom Street, or how would you feel about it?
I would. And when I was talking to the heritage officer, do you know, in Waterford County Council, and she said, you know, they could put a civic plaque up. But I'd like a civic plaque with the picture of, you know, of the nave. Yeah, in it. Yes. Yeah, I'd like it in the plaque, because I'd like people to be able to see it. Do you know?
Yeah, I've seen things done in other countries where you look at it like a glass thing, right? And when you look at it, you can see where the 3D effect.
Yeah.
You can see where the church was.
Oh,
in
right.
Carver
Yeah.
At the time.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So things like that are now becoming common in historic places around Europe and stuff like that?
Well, we had a therapeutic community in Kent. Do you know, this is where the North Downs Way was near. And when we closed it down before I came back to Ireland, the Ministry of Defence knocked it down, absolutely took it down to the ground. It was beautiful, Lutyens, house, studio, Tudor house, they razed it to the ground. And I used to get these heartbreaking phone calls and emails from our former lads and girls, who would get there and there'd be nothing there. So we had a reunion and we got this plaque made, and it just says, here stood Rainwood House Therapeutic Community. And then it has a way of contacting me, a website. But in the middle of it is a photograph of the house. And I think that's of huge therapeutic benefit to people who've come all the way down from London with nothing to see. They can see it. And it's a brilliant way of reproducing the house. That's what I'd like to see up on the wall on Thomas Hill.